So today we're going to look at setting up a project in After Effects and the interface for the program. You'll find After Effects on the dock. It is the AE icon. So if you open that up, you'll be presented with this interface here. Now there are lots of different panels and we're going to work through them one point at a time. So we're going to start off with the project panel here. This is where you import your media and where you organize it into folders to make your project more manageable if you have lots of different assets. So we'll start off by importing some content. So we can do that in a few different ways. We can go to the File drop-down menu and go to Import, and we can select File. And you can see that we have lots of different images here. Now you can import pretty much any kind of media file. And the way to select is exactly the same as if you're in Finder. You can select individual items, or you can select multiple items holding down the Shift key. And you can select multiple individual items by holding down the Command key. We can then select Open to bring those in. We can also import files by double-clicking within the project panel, and it will bring up the Import File pop-up window, and from there we can select, just as before, what we'd like to bring in. Once you have some content in our project panel, it can get a little bit confusing if you have lots of different assets. So what we like to do is to organize them into folders so we can quickly find what we were looking for. And we can do that by holding down the Control key and clicking within the project window, and we can select New Folder. We can then give this a name. And then, just as you would expect, we're then able to select all of the different assets that we want and click and drag them to place them into that folder. You'll also note that there is a shortcut button down here to create a new folder. So we'll create another one and add those additional elements there. So this makes our project much easier to navigate and to find what content we're looking for and when we need it. You'll also notice that we have a little dustbin down here. This allows us to delete an element from our project panel. Deleting from your project does not delete the asset from your computer, it just removes its use in your project. Likewise, organizing things into folders does not change where that item is saved on your computer, it literally just allows you to organize it within the project. Now, sometimes we can also need to rename files, and to do that we can just select it, press the return key, and we can type in a new name. Now, when we rename a file, it's just renaming its use within your project. The original file has not been renamed. In the same way as when we've moved them into different folders within After Effects, it doesn't affect the original source file in any way. It just helps us organize our projects. Now, once we have brought some assets in, and we've organized them so we're ready to go, we might need to have a look at our videos and that we're using and have a little bit of a tweak of them to make sure that they're going to work properly. And we can do that and get access to all kinds of other options if we hold down our Control key and click on a video clip. We have a few different options, but if we look at interpret footage, for example, we're then able to see what the frame rate is, and we're able to change what that frame rate is. We're able to, whether it's progressive or interlaced, in which field it's going to use first. And we can change the frame rate of the footage if we know it's something particular, but the After Effects isn't assigning it the correct frame rate. We can change and assess that there. There are other color management options which we don't have to worry about just now. So you can make any adjustments you like, and then we can just click OK. If we look at some of the other options, if we look, we've also got reload footage. This is useful, for instance, if you are using an image sequence instead of a piece of video, and you have edited and changed that image sequence. You can reload it so that the up-to-date version of your image sequence is being used in After Effects. We can also reveal it in Finder, which will show us where it is stored on your hard drive. All useful stuff. Once you've brought all of your elements in and you're ready to start making your project, it's now time to create a composition. A composition is a collection of all of your media clips that you are able to bring together and animate. To make our new composition, we go to the Composition drop-down menu and we go to New, and then we're given this pop-up window here. Now in the presets, you'll have all of the different standard video presets for TV and broadcast, and some for cinema as well, and you want to pick the correct one for your project. Now if you're working for a larger video project that is going into either Premiere or Final Cut, you want to make sure you select the same video format that you're working in the editing program. So I'm going to, for now, just leave it on HDTV 1080x25. So that will tell us our resolution here, our pixel aspect ratio, and our frame rate. Now we can adjust these and make a custom setting if we need to as well, but I'm just going to leave it on the standard setting there. Now towards the bottom we also have our duration. Now in After Effects you'll work on individual shots. You won't work on an incomplete long project. You'll do individual shots in After Effects and then edit them together in a video editing program. Now because of that, we're only going to have a very limited duration in our timeline, unlike in a video editing program where your timeline extends as long as you require. You add more clips, that it will continue to extend in duration. You have a fixed duration in After Effects. So I'm just going to make this composition 10 seconds long. Now we can go back at any point and change this, so that's not so important, but you want to make sure you have a time frame that makes sense for the shot you're working on. So then I'm going to click OK, and we now have our blank composition. So now we have our composition monitor has lit up here, and beneath that we have our composition timeline. Now the composition monitor works just like the canvas in Photoshop or in a video editing program. This is where we assemble our compositions and produce what our animations look like. And beneath that we have our timeline. Now the timeline works just like the timeline does in a video editing program. It extends in time from left to right, the far left being 0 seconds, extending outwards from there. But just to the side of that we have this portion here, which works like the layers portion in Photoshop. So these two mixed together allow us to both see how our composition works in time and the order in which our layers are stacked. We also have a little preview panel here. This is where we get our transport controls and our render controls. We'll look at them in a wee moment once we've added some content to our composition. Now, to add content to our composition, we can take a video clip and then we can click and drag it onto our composition, and it will place that there. We could also take it and drag it straight into the layers portion of our timeline, and if we want to remove a layer we can simply select it and press the backspace key, and it will remove that asset. We can also click onto an asset directly on our compositional monitor, press the backspace key there, and that will remove it from that point as well.
So let's add some media to our composition and render that for playback.
So if we take a piece of footage
and add it to our composition, we can now see that footage in our composition monitor, and if we press play in our preview panel, you see that it plays back, but it's playing back very slow and very jerky. As we can see from the info panel, it is not real time. It's only playing at just under 5 frames a second, when it should be playing at 25 frames a second. That's because the video requires rendering by After Effects before it can play back in real time. Now, if I drag my playhead back to the beginning, and if I press this button here, which is our RAM preview button, it will generate all of the render information needed, and it will store it in the RAM, hence the name RAM Preview. Now, this can take a wee while. The more complex your composition, the more elements you have, the longer this will take. Once it is finished RAM previewing, it will be able to play back at real time without any bother at all. Now, to speed this process up, we can do one of a few things. We can start by bringing in our render area tabs here. Now, we would do this if we were working on one area in our composition, one part of our composition we're working on at the moment. So now, if I was to RAM preview, it would only concentrate on the point between these two markers. Currently, we are also at full resolution. We are previewing back our footage at its full scale and at its full quality. We can drop that quality, that resolution, to half, thirds and quarters, thus requiring less information because it's a smaller frame, temporarily just for the preview purposes, thus being able to make our RAM previews faster. Now, we have our resolution controls up here: full, half, third, quarter, and auto. Now, I usually have this set on auto because if we look on our composition monitor, we have the same controls but specific to this composition. Now, this is useful if you have more than one composition within your project. So if I was now to drop that to half, because the resolution here is set to auto, it will now RAM preview at half resolution. So if I press the RAM preview button now, it will do the RAM preview a good bit quicker than if it was doing it at full resolution. And that's it, playing back there nice and quick. Now, we have a few other controls in our preview here. We can set it to skip frames, so it'll play only every second frame, every fifth frame. That way it'll have less frames to render. If we did this, it'd be very jerky for our playback. We can also click this full screen button, so when we play it back, we get a full screen preview so that the rest of our interface drops away, so we're only left with what our composition that we're actually working on. I just press the space bar as a shortcut to stop that playback. Make sure I have that unticked. Now, we can add obviously more than one element to our composition, so I'm going to take a second piece of footage and I'm going to add that here. Now, as you'll see, this piece of footage has obscured the previous piece of footage. That's because our layers, just like in Photoshop, are hierarchical. And just like in Photoshop, we can change the order of our layers, thus changing what is visible. So I was to take this clip that we just added and drag it beneath. It is now being obscured by this top piece of footage here. Now I can also move elements within my composition, and I can scale those elements as well. Just as you expect, just as with Photoshop, if I hold down the Shift key, it locks the aspect ratio. So I can then place that up there. So now when I press the RAM preview button, it will render my video with these two different elements and allow me to view that at full speed. Okay, that's the very basic introduction to After Effects. There's a lot more to cover in this program, but these fundamental basics of how to create compositions, importing assets, setting up our projects and using folders and RAM previewing and adding elements to our composition are all vitally important, and we need to make sure we have those elements kind of secure and down before we can move on to more complex things such as keyframing and animating, which we'll look at in later videos.